morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, The Cost of Not Being Influential as a Leader. Right now, around Australia, around New Zealand, we're seeing some very good examples of influence and some poor examples of influence. We've seen Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand exhibit magnificent influence as a leader in a time of crisis. We've seen some Australian leaders struggle to be as influential as they would like. On the sporting scene, we're seeing some Australian sporting stars being very influential and other Australian sporting stars being totally influential, being ridiculed, and in fact being quite embarrassing. I'm not going to mention any names. So what is the cost of not being influential? I just want to do a little dive into this subject, and as it relates to us when we're doing public speaking or presentation skills or facilitation, we need to think of ourselves as influencers and as leaders. You may be just presenting a curriculum, you may be presenting some training, but I want you to think yourself as an influencer. And if you don't, or you're not influential, or you're not able to get your message across, what is the cost of that to you and to your organization, and maybe even a bigger cost? So Peter Dew's my name. I'm a public speaking trainer and coach, and I specialize in showing you how to find your voice so that you can influence, you can make the change, you can impact your communities and your organizations the way that you would like to. So welcome to the webinar. How to participate, a couple of new names. As with most webinars, ask questions as we go. Don't wait for me to say, does that make sense? Are there any questions? I will pause periodically, but please just type into the question box and I will see your question and be able to respond straight away. Take notes and make comments. And think about what you might do to be more influential, or what you may have not done, opportunities you may have missed to be more influential, and what you might do to change that. So apply this knowledge to your own personal circumstances. While I give a reasonable amount of information, I don't expect everything to work for you. Pick those one or two things that you say, yes, that's really helpful to me. I can make use of that. All right. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Sarah. We just got underway. Michael, welcome. So the agenda is, I'm just going to talk about the importance of influence and why do we need to be influential, and those two kind of go hand in hand. And then I'm going to go through some costs of not being influential. And as we go through those costs, you'll understand what you can do differently in your own circumstance to address that particular issue if it applies to you. All right. Importance of influence. Influence is how we have impact. Influence is how we bring people on a journey. Influence is not about being manipulative. Influence is not about power, and influence is not about your position or your title. Do you know the difference between influence and manipulation? Yeah, one is negative, one is positive. I guess so. Most people would see manipulation as negative. So the real difference between influence and manipulation, and this is where influence becomes important, is it is your intention. So influence, you're impacting people with the purposes of helping the people, benefiting the people, make a change, get to a better place, learn something that's of value to them. Manipulation is doing the same thing but to benefit me. I'm going to manipulate you into buying a product that you don't need so I can become rich and wealthy. And we do have snake oil salesmen who sell remedies, solutions, get rich schemes, and they use their power of influence to manipulate you into doing something that you don't need, you don't really want, for their own benefit, for their own advantage. Someone like Professor Barry Marshall, the Nobel Prize winner for medicine, he tried hard to influence people, to change people's belief around peptic ulcers, around stomach ulcers. And in the end, his ultimate way of influence was to infect himself. In other words, drink a culture of bacteria that everyone in the world said that is not the cause of peptic ulcers, and he infected himself to prove to the world that he knew what caused peptic ulcers and he knew how to cure peptic ulcers. And his purpose was to rid the world of peptic ulcers, which costs many thousands of lives, not to mention pain, loss of work, treatments that don't really work because the world did not know the cause of peptic ulcers. He wasn't doing it to get rich, to sell you snake oil or a magic fix. He truly believed that he had the solution to the world's problem of peptic ulcers and knew how to cure them. And he needed to influence people for the betterment of the world. He did win the Nobel Prize. He didn't become a multi-billionaire as a result of his discovery. The science world, the health world has that intellectual property. But that's the importance of influence. Why do we need to be influential as leaders? Let's start with what is a leader, because many people I work with, as I build their confidence around public speaking or presenting or facilitating, believe it's just their role as a trainer, or they've chosen to do a seminar and present some research, but they're not leaders. My boss is the leader, I'm just a worker. Here's the thing. Being a leader is not determined by what is written on your business card. So having a business card that says manager, chief operating officer, chief executive officer, director, that doesn't make you a leader. Quincy Adams, and I have to paraphrase here, said that if people follow you, if you inspire them by what you do, by what you say, by how you behave, then you are a leader. So anyone going about their daily life is a leader. A person in the street who shows compassion to someone who is struggling. Many people walk by. That person is a leader and will influence other people to stop and help. So when you get before a group of people to train them, to speak to them, to present your research, to run a seminar, you are in, by definition, a leadership perspective, and you have the ability to influence people. That's why we need to be influential as leaders. And every time we get before a group of people, we are a leader. People will follow us. They'll listen to us. They're there because they have a problem, that you have the solution, an idea, a way forward. All right. Are there any questions? So Stevens said, but at a meeting with executives, and I'm just doing the report, how can I be a leader when the executives make the decision on how to spend the money? I'm just reporting. It's a good question, Stephen. And even though there's executives in the room, the way you deliver that report with passion, with authenticity, with insight, with experience, with ideas on what's going well, what's not going well, would enable you to influence that particular group of people. So here's an example. In the mining sector, they have a kind of understanding that anybody, no matter what your status, your title, your salary, anyone can raise a health and safety issue. Now, maybe in the world of finance, it doesn't seem as important, but in the world of safety, one person sees something that they're not happy with. They think is risky. They have permission to report it to their supervisors, to their managers. They can bring it to a meeting, and that will influence people to change policy, to react, to put another level of safety in if required. So that is anyone. If, in fact, the saying is, if in the safety field, in the mining sector, if you see it, you own it. You are responsible for it. You need to influence change to make that safe. You are a leader in that particular safety risk that you've identified. You are a leader in that particular problem you've identified within the financial reports. Then you need to bring that to the CEO, the Chief Financial Officer's attention. Even though you're there just to report, you bring that to their attention, and if you want to be influential, you have ideas and possibilities, if they ask, that you can put forward as a way forward. Thanks, Stephen. So that's why we need to be influential as leaders. If we want people to follow us, to change the way they do things, to change their behavior, then you need to be influential. If you want to bring in a culture of inclusiveness, in other words, allowing other people to speak up at meetings, to put their ideas forward, you need to be influential. You don't have to be the chairman of that meeting. Anyone in the meeting could put their idea forward and then ask, so what does anyone else think about that? And that way you have included everyone in the meeting and you've shown leadership, even though the chairman is in charge of that meeting. All right. The cost of not being influential. This is the crux of this particular webinar. 5 things I'm going to cover. You may be seen as ineffective or weak. People will lose trust. They won't trust you, so they're less likely to follow you. Your messages are not taken seriously, so you become hot air. You're misunderstood. They do take you seriously, but they take the wrong message because you lack the influence. And it can affect, I guess, the culture and professional development and team development of that organisation if you as a leader are not influential. So let me go through those one by one. By the way, I have a flyer that I hand out, and it's about, well, in fact, this webinar comes from this, a double-sided handout, and it's the cost of not being influential as a leader or manager. Has a little bit more detail if anyone's interested. So first one, you may be seen as weak or ineffective. People bring ideas at meetings, people speak up, and you don't get the changes. You don't get the new safety policy, the extra procedure put in place. You don't get the risk removed, and you're the boss. you're the carrier of the message, then you're seen as weak or ineffective. So you're a leader, people bring stuff to you and nothing happens. Then why bring anything to you? It's a waste of my time bringing it to you. Because while I raise issues, you say, oh yeah, really good point. But in a month's time, nothing's changed because you have not been able to influence the change. So people around you will see you as weak and as being ineffective. Now, of course, leadership's not just in your workplace. This is in your communities, whether you're a volunteer, whether you are in a sporting club, whether you're in a not-for-profit organisation. I belong to my self-help group, the Speakeasy Association of Western Australia. I'm off to a national conference where I would like to see some changes. The West Australian people bring that to me. I take that to national. If we don't get changes, then I may be seen as weak or ineffective. Now, it doesn't mean everything you want to happen will change, but by raising it and bringing it to people's attention, as long as they've got good reasons why they don't feel we need to make that change, and you can articulate that back, then that should still help you be seen as influential. So you have some wins and some things you can't change. Management decides that's the policy, it's staying that, but you have a couple of wins, then you're still seen as influential. So we don't want to be seen as weak or as being ineffective. People will stop bringing ideas to us. Loss of trust. People won't trust you anymore. Going back to the mining sector and safety, health and safety. When people raise an issue at a meeting to their safety officer, they do so with the expectation that something will change, something will happen. If nothing happens, then they lose trust. If they lose trust, then people will not come to you. They will keep quiet. And what happens is the issue, the risk is not rectified, and sure enough, 3 months, 6 months down the track, the accident, the near miss occurs, someone is injured, someone's off work, and this is because you lost the trust of people. So influence is how you keep building trust. So people buy from people they know, like, and trust. So people will buy your idea, your new way of doing business, your new safety procedure, your new reporting, financial reporting idea. They'll buy that off you because they trust you. They know you. If you are a non-influential leader, then they won't trust you. You risk losing trust. Your message may not be taken seriously because you're not influential. You stand up and you present, you don't have any credibility. For people to adopt your way of thinking, to adopt your message, you need to be influential. You need to have credibility, you need to have experience, you need to have some body of evidence, some data, some information that helps people believe you and you become more influential. Depending on the audience, you will need to use different techniques to be influential. If this was a room of engineers, geologists, give them the data, give them the evidence-based. If this is a group of health professionals, social workers, counsellors, you may need to give some stories. Some stories of what was and the problem and how the intervention, the new way, resulted in positive outcomes, creates a visceral heart response, and you become more influential. Your message is then taken on board. If you have no influence, then your message may not be taken seriously. That's the cost of not being influential. Influence is an art, it's a science, it's a skill that we can learn. So my proposition is that you need to become more influential. Otherwise, you could be just hot air. You could be speaking wonderful truths. Professor Barry Marshall for 8 years spoke wonderful truth around the world that nobody believed. He was not taken seriously because he did not have credibility, he did not have proof, and he did not have influence. You may be misunderstood. Your messages may be unclear. Which way do you want me to go? So many one-way streets, I'm not quite sure what you want me to do. You're not really influencing me. And this can come to clarity of message as well. I was in Singapore over the weekend and I saw this sign, and as the shop is called Cold Storage. That's the name of the shop, Cold Storage. It's Woolworths, Coles, it's Aldi, it's like IGA. It's a grocery store. It's quite a big grocery store in the heart of Singapore. I went in there to do some shopping, and their byline is the fresh food people. So I'm a little bit confused, because to me, cold storage is how you take fresh food and you preserve it, you keep it for later on, and the food is not fresh. And they've got a Granny Smith. So this may be a West Australian perspective, but fresh Granny Smiths we pick off the apple tree and we bite into straight away. You can get Granny Smiths all year round. They pick them in Manjimup and they put them in cold storage, and you get them 6 months, 7 months later, because the season's not for 12 months. And that is you can tell it's a cold storage. It's a little bit stale. It's not as crisp as the fresh apple. So I think this is a mixed message in an Australian perspective. Now, having said that, walking into the store, they had lots of beautiful fresh produce, and Singaporeans are very clever at logistics, and I'm sure most of that food is just been, delivered very fresh from the producer. It's the sign, it's the message that confused me, and I was being a little bit pedantic. I do acknowledge that. So what I'm saying is, just make sure that you're not misunderstood. If you want to be influential, you have to have absolute clarity of message, clarity of purpose, clarity of activity, and they all need to be congruent. It's walk the talk, it's breathe the talk, it is consistency. And I was at a seminar the other night. It was about personal branding. And personal branding is what people say about you when you're not around. And consistency, if you Google yourself, and I tried this exercise, and I've got different photos and I've got different bios, different biographies, so there's no consistency. So I may be misunderstood as to exactly what I do, because I've got some old stuff out there. I've got different photos that are not consistent in terms of my branding and my message. So to be influential, you will not be understood. If you're not influential, people may misunderstand and lessen the impact of your message. It can affect professional development and team development. You want people to follow you. You want to inspire new leaders. Which of these people around the table are going to upskill, do the MBA, follow in your footsteps because you've inspired them, you've influenced them to doing professional development, to develop as a team, to trust each other in a team, and we spoke about trust earlier on. Influential people create cultures of continuous improvement, cultures of productivity, cultures of lifelong learning. You can do that if you're influential, and then you get high-performing teams. If you're not influential, then you risk your ability to move that team to the way they undertake professional development, to the way they communicate, because you yourself are not influential. So my message is that we need to be influential. It's a privilege when we get before an audience. So it's a privilege for me speaking to you today out in the virtual world. And with that privilege comes responsibility. That responsibility is to educate you, to give you information that you can use. So I'm challenging you, every time you get before an audience, make sure you are influential, not manipulative, not using your power, but rather influencing people to do things that are going to better their lives, their careers, their workplaces, their colleagues, in a safer way, in whatever way you're trying to make the change. That's the value of influence. If you're not influential, you may be seen as weak or ineffective. You may lose the trust. Your messages may not be taken seriously. You could give mixed messages, be misunderstood, and you won't be able to create the cultures, the professional development, the team growth that you may wish to do, that your organisation may need to do. Influence is a leadership skill. Influence is a skill that speakers, trainers and facilitators need to master. Otherwise, you risk losing your audience, losing your ability to change, shape and influence the world in the way that we need to. Moving on, soft sell, upcoming workshops, Perth this week, speaking off the cuff, how to have difficult conversations. Off to Melbourne, 5th of August, and that's around the art and science of influence, difficult conversations. Darwin, more workshops in Perth in August. And next webinar, because you're in webinar world, is do you do an icebreaker or not? So you're running a seminar, should you do a meet and greet, an exercise, a human bingo, do an icebreaker or not? I've got some firm views and also some information I'd like to share to you about whether to do an icebreaker or not. So this is Peter Dew. Thank you for your time. Remember, every time you get before an audience, you have that ability to influence them, to bring about very effective and powerful change. Don't let your non-influence impact your ability to change the world.